Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Tales of Herding God Part 160 based on novel. So let's start. There was a ruin in the desert. More than half of the earth-yellow palaces had collapsed and only some crumbling fences and dilapidated walls were left. Flames were burning a bit more furiously over there than in other places. The space that the ruins occupied was very vast, the size of several thousand fields. Flames blazed around the sand giant, and its body was scarlet from them. The giant had no legs, but it could still travel extremely fast along the great streets and small alleys of the ruin. Below the body of the sand giant was violent sand that kept spinning upwards. Thus, even though it had no legs, its speed was still very fast. At that moment, the sand giant was chasing after Qin Mu and Pangong-so. The two of them were being attacked often, and loud thumps rang out continuously. Every strike from the sand dune giant was incomparably heavy, and when they landed on the desert, sandstone would shoot out like swords. Yet the sand giant didn't damage the ruin at all. When it encountered broken fences and dilapidated walls, it would flood over. After it flowed past, the ruin would be left perfectly fine. The divine arts of West Earth was different from those of eternal peace, and the path they took was that of all things having soul. Even sandstone could be changed into a giant to fight, and one strike from a sand giant could split mountains. Its power was unblockable. If Qin Mu and Pangong-so got struck, just the terrifying energy alone would be enough to heavily injure the two of them. Even so, they were still trying to kill each other while doing their best to avoid the attacks of the sand giant. Pangong-so's broken arm impaired his movements. Qin Mu could control 8,000 swords, but no matter how intricate his sword skill was, it was still hard for him to injure the sand giant. Even if he sliced one of its arms into pieces, this giant would return back to normal in a few moments, retaining no injury. Its body technique was extraordinary, and the attacks of the sand giant were incomparably overbearing. However, since it only used its fists to attack, and not spells or divine arts, it wasn't much of a threat to them. However, what was weird was that the sand giant seemed to only be attacking Qin Mu. It paid no attention to Pangong-so. Spell of True Heaven Palace. The dragon Qilin looked around and asked, "Where is the spellcaster hiding?" "That's a guardian of the desert. It's not a divine art." Xiong-Chia climbed onto his head while pulling on his man'er. She took a look at the situation and said, "My mom said that there are many ancient ruins in the desert, and they are places where the gods who guarded the desert lived. When they had to go, they left behind some guardians to look after the desert. Any person from great ruins will be attacked by the guardians." Suddenly, red sand churned in the ruin and another sand giant stood up, rushing quickly at the youth. Qin Mu stretched his hands out and numerous scarlet-red sand dragons whizzed forward, rushing at the sand giants. While chasing after Pangong-so, his vital qi had been circulating more and more furiously, and the power of his divine art becoming stronger and stronger. At that moment, his battle power was at its strongest. The dozens of scarlet sand dragons tore apart the sand giants. Qin Mu was astonished, for he felt the magic power in his divine art being absorbed. When the sand dragons passed through the bodies of the sand giants, the magic power inside them completely vanished. Pangong-so saw a good moment and rushed over with the huge cauldron on his head. The two sand giants behind him, who had absorbed the magic power, the divine art, as well as the dozens of sand dragons, grew drastically and attacked Qin Mu as well. Qin Mu formed fists and straightened his thumb, using a punch to fight against Pangong-so's punch. Pangong-so immediately felt that his attack had no power, but that there was a concaving power in the fist that was pulling him in. The straightened thumb made Pangong-so shudder. The power in that punch of his lies in that thumb. He struggled to break free, having just realized that Qin Mu's move was not a fist skill at all. Instead, it was a sword skill in which his thumb was the sword. If Pan Gong Tso didn't break free and the thumb pressed down on him, the sword power would definitely slice him in half. How did this fellow's battle technique improve so fast and become so terrifying? It hasn't even been a year since the last time we fought, so how did his abilities improve so fast? Pan Gong Tso used all his strength to break free from Qin Mu's fist. The moment he did so, the sword light in Qin Mu's thumb increased exponentially. His vital qi transformed into a thread, which was like fine swords coiling together. The sword light sliced down when Qin Mu pressed his thumb down. Pan Gong Tso suddenly changed into a black shadow which fell and stuck to the sandy ground. He then quickly left into the distance. Qin Mu raised his hand and pressed down, causing a huge handprint to appear on the ground. Pan Gong Tso let out a sigh of relief. This guy missed. Yet the next moment, the sword lights that were hiding in the sky and covering the earth hummed and shot down altogether. The area they covered was extremely vast and made it impossible for him to avoid them. Suddenly, a third sand giant stood up from beneath Qin Mu's feet, and the sword rain falling from mid-air grew disordered. Pan Gong Tso broke out from his shadow and transformed into a human to leap out from the desert. He flashed along the way to avoid the sword lights, escaping out of the ruin. He turned back to take a look, only to see Qin Mu being drowned out by the three sand giants. His life and death could not be determined. When this guy gets severely injured, it would be the best time for me to kill him. Just as Pan Gong Tso thought that, he saw the dragon Qilin sprinting over and sneered. Even an animal like you dares to make a move on me. He then bowed and shouted sternly, "Fatty dragon, update by." A huge sacrificial altar appeared behind him and the devil god on the sacrificial also bowed. The dragon Qilin ignored him, and Pan Gong Tso grew slightly flustered. He bowed once more in a hurry. Dragon Qilin. The dragon Qilin was already near him, flames spreading out from his mouth. Pan Gong Tso vomited blood. His injuries were not light, and the divine art which paid respect to the soul was extremely exhausting to his vitality. Paying his respects twice drained a lot of his vitality. Ching ching. Pan Gong Tso gritted his teeth and paid his respects once more. Xiong Chia grabbed the manet of the dragon Qilin and climbed onto the head of the fat behemoth to look curiously at the youth before them. Pan Gong Tso spat out a mouthful of blood as a beam of fire from the dragon Qilin's mouth emanated with blazing flames, sweeping at him across a dozen miles. Everywhere the beam passed, the dunes were razed to the ground. Pan Gong Tso hurriedly hid in the great cauldron and listened as the loud banging sounds went into the distance. The cauldron was then swept into the air and tumbled dozens of miles away. The dragon Qilin sprinted over where the cauldron had landed, but only saw a sand pit with bloodstains. It was obvious that Pan Gong Tso had escaped into the ground. My abilities actually couldn't stop him. Those who can live for 10,000 years are indeed all remarkable. His ability to escape is even superior to that of Cult Master, the dragon Qilin exclaimed in admiration. A loud explosion suddenly came from the ruin, and the dragon Qilin turned back to look. Over there, he saw a fourth sand giant rising from the ground. It was 100 yards tall and comparable to Great Thunderclap Monastery's 10,000 Buddha's pagoda. It moved incomparably fast and chased relentlessly after Qin Mu. I can't let Cult Master be harmed. The dragon Qilin immediately sprinted over, and he saw Qin Mu's body suddenly vanish. The next moment, he appeared in front of him and floated in mid-air. His whole body was covered in strange flames and teleportation runes circulating rapidly. Qin Mu hurriedly extinguished the flames on his body, his face already black from the burns. Luckily, his clothes were tailored by Yu Zhaoqing and other strong practitioners of Heavenly Feather race, so they weren't destroyed in the flames. Various sounds rang out behind him, and Qin Mu turned back to take a look. The sand giants actually flew out of the ruin, and rushed over aggressively. "Fatty dragon, fall back." Qin Mu waved his hand and stopped the dragon Qin, who was rushing over. The sand giants were extremely fast, and soon rushed in front of Qin Mu. They then swayed and separated into two groups, launching a pincer attack on him from the right and left. Just as they were about to pounce on him, the teleportation runes around Qin Mu's body lighted up, and his body vanished once more. The sand dune giants collided and sand filled the air. Soon though, they took shape once more and hurried back toward the ruin in a frantic rush. Before they could return, however, they suddenly crumbled and transformed back into dunes that piled one onto another. The dragon Qin hurriedly ran over to where Qin Mu was floating in mid-air. Below him was a palace that was more than half collapsed. Inside it was a shrine with a wooden god statue that was covered in strange markings. Its head was on the floor. Qin Mu raised his hand, and carefree sword flew into it. He looked at the head of the wooden god statue with a grim face. When he had lured the sand giants out just then, he had returned back to the ruin and surveyed it with cinnabar heaven's eyes. He discovered then that there were strange markings flowing continuously on the wooden god statue, so he had sliced off its head in one strike. Once he did that, the markings which were originally glowing slowly dimmed. A terrifying brainwave had rushed out from the god statue toward Qin Mu. However, it was blocked by the jade pendant hanging from his neck. "How strange." Qin Mu turned his head back and asked, "Chia, are there gods in your West Earth's West Heaven Palace?" Xiong Chia shook her head and replied, "I've never heard about that before." Qin Mu gripped the jade pendant and said in a low voice, "There's a consciousness hidden in this god statue, and it even attacked me when I cut off its head. The owner of this god statue should still be alive." "Cult master, Pan Gongtso escaped," the dragon Qin said. Qin Mu didn't mind it. He has been escaping for 10,000 years and has long perfected the art of it. So it won't be easy to get rid of him in one go. Didn't he also escape when Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor surrounded Roland's golden palace? What makes my heart throb is that there might be a living god in West Earth's true heaven palace. He raised his head to look to the west. The wooden statue could actually gather sand to form giants. This showed that it was using the ultimate art of true heaven palace. It was called 10,000 Spirit Nature Technique, and was suitable for women to cultivate. Even though Xiong Xiu had imparted it to Qin Mu, his gains weren't great. Imperial Preceptor went to True Heaven Palace, so he's probably going to be out of luck. Qin Mu pulled away his gaze and thought to himself, "I hope that God's ability isn't too great, for otherwise." He shook his head. "What worries me even more is why did this god of True Heaven Palace leave behind this ruined palace? The sand giants are clearly for killing the abandoned people of Great Ruins. How exactly did True Heaven Palace look like originally?" He jumped onto the dragon Chilin's back, who rushed toward the west. Soon, they covered over 10 miles. The ruin was silent, but after a moment, a rustling could be heard, and the markings on the two pieces of wood gradually lighted up. The head suddenly flew up and landed on the neck of the wooden statue. Its markings grew brighter and brighter. The sculpture actually slowly began to change, its wooden body turning into flesh and blood. What was even more terrifying was that the statue actually twisted its head to the back of its body. Its eyes slowly opened and looked in the direction of Qin Mu. The wooden statue opened its mouth and spoke in a hoarse voice. "A noble of the abandoned people, I." Swoosh! A sword light broke through the air after having stayed close to the ground, piercing the head of the wooden statue that was changing into flesh and blood. The sword light then flashed, slicing the wooden god statue into countless pieces. Sometime later and 20 miles away, the sword light returned to Qin Mu's sheath. "God, I've also killed some of your kind before. Qin Mu folded his arms as he stood on the dragon Chilean's head. His body rose and lowered along with its movement. As the sun set in the west, the flaming desert was colored fiery red. Qin Mu rode on the dragon Chilean's head, having transformed his vital qi into vermilion bird vital qi to refine each and every one of his flying swords. He was deepening the rune markings on them. He lowered his head and saw that Xiongqia had already fallen asleep in the dragon Chilean's ear. There was no wind there, and the dragon Chilean also used his ear to cover its inside to protect the little girl with utmost care. Fatty dragon is really not bad, Qin Mu praised in his heart. This fatty is actually quite meticulous. The taste of scarlet fire spirit pills and fire element divine vitality pills is indeed not that good. I should improve it for him once we find a place to land. Cult Master, there's an oasis ahead, the dragon Chilean suddenly said. Qin Mu looked ahead of them, and he indeed saw an oasis. I wonder if there's water there. I can endure another day without water, but I'm afraid for Chia. The flaming desert was incomparably scorching, and there was no moisture in the air. Qin Mu couldn't get any water even when he changed to Black Tortoise Vital Qi. He had never had to worry about the problem of water supply before, but now with Xiongqia by his side, he couldn't ignore it anymore. After a moment, the dragon Chilean reached the oasis, and they saw a couple snow-white goatskin tents built beside the lake. People wearing West Earth's clothing were raising fire to cook their meals. The dragon Chilean looked around cautiously and said, I wonder if Pangong Tso escaped here. Cult Master, be careful. He's severely injured, so he couldn't have run far. Qin Mu jumped down and opened up the dragon Chilean's ear, from which he took out the sleeping Xiongqia with a smile. Don't worry. Since I'm here, even if he's nearby, he won't dare to come out. If he decides to show up, it will just make it more convenient for me to get rid of him. The tribesmen of West Earth wore embroidered headbands. When they saw the newcomers, their faces changed drastically, but they didn't dare to make a sound. Qin Mu looked around and saw that there were a lot more men than women in the camp, and under the daily hardships, their faces were red from the sun. There were also some two-legged yellow gazelles in the oasis along with some commodities. The group was most likely traveling merchants. Even though the speed of the two-legged gazelles was fast and their ability to carry weight was also great, riding them was a very bumpy experience. Because of that, only merchants chose to use this kind of strange beast. Even it was bumpy riding the two-legged gazelles, they could deliver more goods. Qin Mu came to an elderly merchant and said, Elder, my little sister is asleep. Could I borrow a tent? The elderly merchant immediately nodded and said, Help yourself. Qin Mu gave his thanks and sent the girl into a tent. The night in the desert was very cold, so it was lucky to get a goatskin tent to keep her warm. On top of that, there were some thick goat fur blankets inside. Qin Mu tucked in Xiongqia, who was still in a daze. Her tiny hands grabbed onto the blanket, and she smacked her lips twice. She had to be hungry, but she didn't wake up. Qin Mu walked out of the tent to see that the sun had already set. With the crackle of the bonfire beside him, he asked, Elder, you guys are merchants from West Earth. Everyone looked at Qin Mu's face and didn't dare to speak. Only the elderly merchant in charge dared to open his mouth. We are from West Earth and are going to Great Ruins to do business. Is Big Brother from Great Ruins? Qin Mu was speechless at first, then broke into laughter. Even though he had grown quite tall, it wasn't even close to him being worthy to be called Big Brother. The fearfulness of the merchants had to be because of the flame markings on his face. From them, they could deduce that he came from Great Ruins. I'm indeed from Great Ruins and I plan to go to West Earth. Qin Mu took out some fresh beef and fruit from his Daotai sack, and gifted it to the other party with a smile. Elder, Thank you for letting my little sister have a place to rest. If Elder doesn't mind, you can just call me Little Qin. The Elder couldn't reject and had to accept. I don't dare to be called Elder. The position of us men in West Earth is slightly lower, only senior women are deserved to be called elders. Brother Qin, you are a person of great ruins, so it is not really good for you to go to West Earth. This flame desert stretches for tens of thousands of miles, and there is blazing fire all along the way. Also, this fire poses numerous dangers to the people of Great Ruins, so it'd be best for you to return. Qin Mu shook his head. I've made a promise to go to West Earth, so how can I break it? Women are the ones who call the shots in West Earth. Eternal Peace Empire also has women generals and officials. Back when Imperial Preceptor was pushing for equality between men and women, he met quite some opposition, so I would have never expected you guys to be even more open than Eternal Peace. The old merchant's face changed and he immediately said, Shush. You can't say equality between men and women, or you will be executed. How can men and women be equal? Women can give birth, men can't give birth, so of course, the men are a class lower. Qin Mu was stunned. The old merchant glanced around and said softly, when you reach West Earth, don't say this kind of muddle-headed words. Of course, that's if you can survive your journey there. Qin Mu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When you reach West Earth, don't say you are from Great Ruins, the old merchant also added solemnly. If you say you are from Great Ruins, you will soon be removed. Qin Mu frowned and asked, why so? The old merchant wasn't willing to go into detail, and Qin Mu didn't force him. He continued to use his vital qi to refine his flying swords. When his cultivation got half exhausted, he would consume a few spirit pills. The flying swords became smaller and smaller from his refinement. I'm still lacking compared to Grandpa Mute, able to refine swords into flowing water. Qin Mu grabbed a flying sword and rubbed it with his hands. It became a small sword pellet, but there were still some protrusions. He executed Carefree Sword and 8,000 swords collided, transforming into a sword pellet. Even though it was much smaller than before, it was still a square of 2 feet. Only when he refined the sword pellet to the size of a thumb could his refinement technique be considered improved. At that point, he could refine swords into flowing water. Qin Mu dispersed his sword pellet and grabbed Carefree Sword. Nearly 8,000 flying swords came swooshing over one after another, fusing with the mother sword. Carefree Sword became heavier and heavier, and when the last one fused into it, Qin Mu's hand trembled. The sword was way too heavy, but he could at least lift it. He tried to swing it, and even though it moved very slowly, crackling sounds from an explosion and humming from tremors came from the sky. It was like the descent of a huge mountain. The explosion noise came from the heaviness of the sword due to the compressed space. Qin Mu swung Carefree Sword twice, and his arms were already sore. He immediately dispersed the child swords, and no longer tormented himself with it. Those dragon language writings on Emperor's Disc and the True Dragon's Nest are really not bad. The 9 Dragons Monarch technique on them is improving my corporeal body at an extremely fast speed. I'd had no chance to lift this sword in the past. What a pity, I still can't figure out many parts of the dragon language on them. In the last couple days, he'd been trying to fuse 9 Dragons Monarch technique with Overlord Body 3 Elixir technique, and his corporeal body was improving at a godly speed. In the past, he had only cultivated the body refinement techniques in great educational heavenly devil scriptures, so just the pure power his corporeal body alone was stronger than the divine arts of most divine arts practitioners. If he executed battle techniques like Thunderclap 8 Strikes and Pig Slaughter Knife, their power would be multiplied several times. The power of the corporeal body had an extraordinary impact on battle techniques. The merchants of West Earth went into their tents to sleep while Qin Mu sat beside the lake. The dragon Qin had shrunk his size and asked Qin Mu for dragon-rearing scriptures. He lay down beside him and used the flames of the desert to read. "Fatty dragon, this fellow has started to put in effort like Linger." Qin Mu was glad. The dragon Qin licked his claws and flipped open dragon-rearing scriptures to read through it carefully. He thought to himself, "Dragon-rearing sovereign wrote dragon-rearing scriptures, so I also want to write my own human-rearing scriptures." Not long later, Qin Mu lay down on the dragon Qin and fell asleep. The dragon Qin also put his head down to rest. Even though the desert was filled with flames at night, the temperature was very low. The surface of the lake had frozen up, but the dragon Qilin's body was very warm. Flames would puff out from his nostrils from time to time. Near midnight, among the flames outside the oasis, Pan Gong Tso dug out from underground. He looked at the sleeping Qin Mu and hesitated for a moment. He wondered if he should close in to kill that fellow now. Qin Mu breathed calmly, having no idea what was happening around him. Pan Gong Tso hesitated one last time, before deciding to land a fatal blow, when he saw Dragon Qi flying out from Dao Tai Sak, as Qin Mu breathed. They were like fine slithering dragons around him. Pan Gong Tso saw Qin Mu's hand in the Dao Tai Sak, and his heart trembled. He suddenly changed his mind and turned around to sink back into the ground. He noticed. Qin Mu opened one eye and looked around before shutting it again. He took out the hand he had placed in his Dao Tai Sak, and continued to guide the dragon in the true dragon's nest while he snored. This time, he had really fallen asleep. Traces of true dragon qi were absorbed by his body, improving his vital qi and raising his cultivation. Qin Mu had relied on the true dragon's nest and emperor's disk to cultivate the last few months, because of which his cultivation had been able to raise that fast. Even Pan Gong Tso, who had reincarnated over 10 times, couldn't get ahead of him. Of course, the most crucial point was still his frequent dual cultivation of primordial spirit with Ling Yuxiu and Sai Yinxiang. It benefited him a lot, and his cultivation didn't fall behind that of Pan Gong Tso, who had entered 7 stars realm. When day broke, Xiong Chia woke up and whined that she was starving. Qin Mu used some minced lean meat and vegetables to cook her porridge. He also made some pastries before refining a few improved spirit pills for the dragon Qilin. "My human rearing scriptures will definitely succeed." The dragon Qilin was full of confidence. Cult Master thought he succeeded in cultivating dragon rearing scriptures, but he has no idea that he's in the grasp of my human rearing scriptures. When the caravan was ready to set off, the old merchant bade farewell to Qin Mu and warned him again, "Brother Qin must never say that you are from great ruins, otherwise, there will be great trouble." Qin Mu thanked him, and got on the dragon Qilin's forehead to rush towards the west. Behind him came the bells ringing on the gazelles' necks, as they carried the goods toward great ruins in the east. The dragon Qilin's speed was fast, but they still couldn't reach West Earth even running all the way to the evening. When they passed by a huge mountain, Qin Mu took a few glances at it, but the dragon Qilin ran past it the next moment. Qin Mu then said, "Fatty dragon, go back." The dragon Qilin was puzzled, but immediately did as asked. Qin Mu examined the mountain, and saw that it was extremely majestic. There were no flames on it, so Qin Mu quickly went to its peak. It was vast and covered in broken fences and dilapidated walls. Qin Mu could imagine the majestic sight back, when everything was still standing. There were some dried-up corpses buried in the sand, and Qin Mu examined them. They showed up to be giants that had abnormally tall and sturdy bodies. He came to a pillar and touched it. Beside it lay some thick chains. "Cult Master, what's with this mountain?" The dragon Qilin flew over on fire clouds. Qin Mu raised his finger to point at the desert far away. "Look over there." The dragon Qin looked in the pointed direction, and saw a pitch-black ball, which let the wind and sand caress it. Its sun ship, a dead sun ship. Qin Mu disembarked from the ship, expressionless. Let's go. The dragon Qin looked at his face and didn't dare to say anything more. Instead, he continued to carry him to the west. Soon after, they encountered a second huge ship. It was a shattered moon ship. After that, they encountered a third huge ship buried in the desert. That moon ship had suffered in an extremely fierce battle, and was exceptionally ruined. Qin Mu suddenly came to realization. 10,000 Spirit Nature Technique is the bane of sun ship and moon ship. When the meteorological phenomenon changed drastically at the end of Founding Emperor era, sun ship and moon ship crafted by the gods of Founding Emperor period were used to drive away the darkness. It allowed things to grow, and the people were able to survive. However, the two types of ships were sharp weapons in battle as well. Sun Guardian of Sun Ship and Moon Guardian of Moon Ship could mobilize the energy of the majestic ship, so that their own energy would reach the level of heavenly gods. They would gain the mighty force to change heaven and earth. Qin Mu had once used Sun Ship and also borrowed Moon Ship, so he knew the powerful and extraordinary points of the two ships. With secrets of dragon control from dragon-rearing scriptures to borrow the power of the divine Flood Dragon King and the Flood Dragons, he could open his divine bridge so his primordial spirit would reach the celestial heavens. However, he could only enter the southern heavenly gates, and had no way to enter the depths of celestial heavens. In comparison, borrowing the power of Sun Ship or Moon Ship would allow him to reach Jade Pavilion, which stood beside Jade Lake. Yet Sun Ship and Moon Ship had their bane, and it was 10,000 Spirit Nature Technique. Sun ships lent power to Sun Guardians and Moon ships lent power to Moon Guardians. That power came from the bodies of the two ships, not their wielders. The two ships possessed boundless terrifying energy, and with the sun or moon forged by gods as an energy source, they were able to drive away the darkness. 10,000 Spirit Nature Technique had the ideology of all things having spirit and all things having soul. It relied on practitioners' sense of nature to create spirits, awakening all things in heaven and earth and calling them to fight. A god who cultivated 10,000 Spirit Nature Technique could wake the spirit in Sun Ship and Moon Ship to fight for them. In that case, what awaited Sun and Moon Guardians, as well as the Sun Herders and Moon Herders, would only be a bloody massacre and death. Even the Guardians themselves wouldn't be able to escape. Many years ago, there must have been a terrifying battle here. Sun ships and Moon ships encountered a god that cultivated 10,000 Spirit Nature Technique, which resulted in them being destroyed, one by one. Meanwhile Qin Mu looked to the west, and his gaze was like candlelight flickering in the wind. West Earth's true heaven palace must have some relation with this. He always felt that West Earth's true heaven palace was a sacred ground like Great Thunderclap Monastery and Tao sect, but even though Palace Master had remarkable divine arts, she was merely a strong practitioner trapped in divine bridge realm. Her sacred ground was no different from the other sacred grounds. However, from the looks of it, West Earth's true heaven palace was probably hiding numerous secrets, and even a terrifying existence. Not only that, just the name True Heaven Palace gave rise to some possible considerations. Heavenly Saint Cult got its name because of Woodcutter imparting his teachings being revered as a saint. Great Thunderclap Monastery was named that because of Mount Meru's height, its top being located at the layer of thunderclouds. When thunder and Buddha voice resonated together, it was so loud that even the deaf could hear. Tao sect was famous because of Tao Sword and Kunlun Mountain, while Little Jade Capital was a fragment of Founding Emperor era's Jade Capital. The names of the sacred grounds revealed their origin in a way. So what was the origin of True Heaven Palace? Why did the god of True Heaven Palace destroy Sun and Moon ships? The ruin of the divine palace in the desert and the strange sand giants were probably the doing of that same god as well. The desert covered in strange flames, which made flame markings appear on the abandoned people, and attempted to burn them to death. Was it also related to true heaven palace? Why would flame markings appear on the abandoned people that stepped onto the land, though? Why would only the abandoned people of great ruins be burned to death, while the others felt nothing when they touched the flames? How many secrets were hidden in West Earth? The flaming desert blazed furiously, feeling extremely scorching to Qin Mu. Suddenly, another ruin appeared in front of them, and before the dragon Qin could close in, they saw violent gusts of sand gathering in there. A sand giant gradually took shape and another was also forming next to it. Violent sand was swirling all around their feet. The dragon Qin was about to take a detour when Qin Mu said, "No need, continue on the way." The dragon Qin could only rush toward the sand giants that were overflowing with murderous intent. Formation markings swirled in Qin Mu's eyes as he surveyed the ruin from afar. The sand giants rushed over and came closer and closer. Suddenly, there was a sword hum as carefree sword swooshed along the desert floor. It raised a whirlwind which swept up the sand. The sand giants came to 100 miles away from the dragon Qin, before suddenly collapsing. Rolling sand surged forth, and the dragon Qin immediately gave a loud roar, dispersing the crumbling dunes. Qin Mu called back carefree sword while the dragon Qin carried him into the ruin. There, he saw a god statue, which was sliced into some 8 pieces lying around the shrine. The dragon Qin floated away. We should be able to enter West Earth by tomorrow afternoon. This video will end here. However, the 2 types of ships were sharp weapons in battle as well. Sun Guardian of Sun Ship and Moon Guardian of Moon Ship could mobilize the energy of the majestic ship, so that their own energy would reach the level of heavenly gods. They would gain the mighty force to change heaven and earth. Qin Mu had once used Sun Ship and also borrowed Moon Ship, so he knew the powerful and extraordinary points of the 2 ships. With secrets of dragon control from dragon rearing scriptures to borrow the power of the divine flood dragon king and the flood dragons, he could open his divine bridge so his primordial spirit would reach the celestial heavens. However, he could only enter the southern heavenly gates and had no way to enter the depths of celestial heavens. In comparison, borrowing the power of Sun Ship or Moon Ship would allow him to reach Jade Pavilion, which stood beside Jade Lake. Yet Sun Ship and Moon Ship had their Bane, and it was 10,000 spirit nature technique. Sun Ships lent power to Sun Guardians and Moon Ships lent power to Moon Guardians. That power came from the bodies of the 2 ships, not their wielders. The 2 ships possessed boundless terrifying energy, and with the sun or moon forged by gods as an energy source, they were able to drive away the darkness. 10,000 spirit nature technique had the ideology of all things having spirit and all things having soul. It relied on practitioners' sense of nature to create spirits, awakening all things in heaven and earth and calling them to fight. A god who cultivated 10,000 spirit nature technique could wake the spirit in Sun Ship and Moon Ship to fight for them. In that case, what awaited Sun and Moon Guardians, as well as the Sun Herders and Moon Herders, would only be a bloody massacre and death. Even the Guardians themselves wouldn't be able to escape. Many years ago, there must have been a terrifying battle here. Sun Ships and Moon Ships encountered a god that cultivated 10,000 spirit nature technique, which resulted in them being destroyed, one by one. Meanwhile Qin Mu looked to the west, and his gaze was like candlelight flickering in the wind. West Earth's true heaven palace must have some relation with this. He always felt that West Earth's true heaven palace was a sacred ground like Great Thunderclap Monastery and Tao Sect, but even though Palace Master had remarkable divine arts, she was merely a strong practitioner trapped in divine bridge realm. Her sacred ground was no different from the other sacred grounds. However, from the looks of it, West Earth's true Heaven Palace was probably hiding numerous secrets, and even a terrifying existence. Not only that, just the name True Heaven Palace gave rise to some possible considerations. Heavenly Saint cult got its name because of Woodcutter imparting his teachings being revered as a saint. Great Thunderclap Monastery was named that because of Mount Meru's height, its top being located at the layer of thunderclouds. When thunder and Buddha voice resonated together, it was so loud that even the deaf could hear. Dao sect was famous because of Dao Sword and Kunlun Mountain, while Little Jade Capital was a fragment of founding Emperor Era's Jade Capital. The names of the sacred grounds revealed their origin in a way. So what was the origin of True Heaven Palace? Why did the god of True Heaven Palace destroy sun and moon ships? The ruin of the divine palace in the desert and the strange sand giants were probably the doing of that same god as well. The desert covered in strange flames, which made flame markings appear on the abandoned people, and attempted to burn them to death. Was it also related to True Heaven Palace? Why would flame markings appear on the abandoned people that stepped onto the land, though? Why would only the abandoned people of great ruins be burned to death, while the others felt nothing when they touched the flames? How many secrets were hidden in West Earth? The flaming desert blazed furiously, feeling extremely scorching to Qin Mu. Suddenly, another ruin appeared in front of them, and before the dragon Qin could close in, they saw violent gusts of sand gathering in there. A sand giant gradually took shape and another was also forming next to it. Violent sand was swirling all around their feet. The dragon Qin was about to take a detour when Qin Mu said, "No need, continue on the way." The dragon Qin could only rush toward the sand giants that were overflowing with murderous intent. Formation markings swirled in Qin Mu's eyes as he surveyed the ruin from afar. The sand giants rushed over and came closer and closer. Suddenly, there was a sword hum as Carefree Sword swooshed along the desert floor. It raised a whirlwind which swept up the sand. The sand giants came to 100 miles away from the dragon Qin, before suddenly collapsing. Rolling sand surged forth, and the dragon Qin immediately gave a loud roar, dispersing the crumbling dunes. Qin Mu called back Carefree Sword while the dragon Qin carried him into the ruin. There, he saw a god statue, which was sliced into some 8 pieces lying around the shrine. The dragon Qin floated away. We should be able to enter West Earth by tomorrow afternoon. This video will end here.